Okay, so right now we're going to talk about this idea of levels of organization. And just to kind of give you a simple analogy for what that might mean. Basically, our body has small parts, and those small parts combine together to give us big parts. And so a simple analogy would be, here's a small part, my eyes. Here's a small part, my nose. Here's a small part, my mouth, my eyebrows, my cheekbones, okay? You combine them all together, and we get a face, which is the larger thing, okay? Now that's a really simple example, and anatomists actually have different terms that they use to classify all small parts on up to the large parts. And so at the very beginning, the smallest parts are going to be at the chemical level. They're what's called chemical. And these are going to be atoms and molecules. Now atoms. Atoms are the very smallest stable part of our body. Okay, and you have to have this idea of stable. They're not going to fly off into a million pieces. They're stable. They stay together. Okay. So if you're following along on the notes packet, we're at this page here, and you could say, what's the level? Well, the first level is going to be atoms. And the definition would be smallest stable unit of matter. Okay, well, what does that mean? What is an atom? And what my students usually find most helpful is to actually have examples. So, and examples you may have heard of. Carbon can be an atom. Hydrogen can be an atom. Oxygen, calcium, all of these are examples of atoms. Okay, they're one small stable unit. Okay, so the next level, meaning that we're going to take these small parts and we're going to combine them into larger parts. Going to be molecules. So what are molecules? Molecules are going to be groups of atoms that combine together for a common function. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, one example that you're probably familiar with would be H2O. So we take two hydrogen atoms and we take an oxygen. We combine them together to get H2O. And you may know H2O is the same thing as water. Okay? So hydrogen has its own function, oxygen has its own function, but you combine these together in a certain way to get water. And we drink water, it's absorbed into our bodies, it becomes part of our blood. Okay, there's a lot of things that happen with this molecule water that hydrogen alone, oxygen alone couldn't do. Now you can have small molecules, you can have large molecules, but eventually if you combine enough molecules together, then you're going to get this thing called cells. And we're going to notice a pattern here. Cells, that's going to be groups of molecules that combine together for a common function. Okay. So, we're starting to see a pattern. From here on out, it's going to be groups of something that combine together. All right. So, one thing that you need to make note of is that cells are the first level that is considered alive. Oxygen, not alive. Hydrogen, not alive. Water, not alive. But you get to the level of a cell, and it is alive. Now, there should be some examples of different types of cells here. Okay, and I've got this picture. Every single one of these is a cell, and you look at this picture and you could ask yourself, well, what's similar, what's different about these things? Well, one of the things my students always notice is there's a real difference in size. Okay, here's an egg, huge. Here's a sperm, quite small in comparison. Okay, here's some blood cells. right? So they're all going to be different sizes. And then you also notice that they're different shapes. This is a muscle cell, has a certain shape. This is a nerve cell, has a very different shape. And hopefully you can remember from what we just talked about with the themes that these cells, since they have different shapes, different sizes, that means they're going to have different what? And hopefully the word that you would put in there would be functions. So remember, different shapes, different functions. Okay, and you can think of it, a blood cell is going to have very different function from an egg and a sperm. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so just to recap, we've talked about chemicals, atoms, and molecules, small and large, and those combine together to give us cells. This is showing a heart muscle cell, and that's the first thing that's considered alive. Now, you might guess the next level is going to be tissues, and that's going to be groups of cells. Okay, and tissues are now going to have new functions that a cell alone could not have. And so let me show you this here. Okay, so this is actually a really cool picture. It's actually a picture of a heart cell. Here's the outside boundary of that cell. This is one view, this is a side view of the same cell. Okay, and you may notice, a lot of students notice these little stripes going across here. Okay, and so these cells, these striped things here, are actually proteins that help the heart cell to contract, which means it's long, and then it contracts, gets shorter, long, shorter. Okay, so an individual cell can just sit there and kind of get shorter and longer, shorter and longer. But now, let's look and see what happens when we take one cell and put it together to form a tissue. And if we go back to our lesson here, and to page 10, now what we're going to be looking at in this video here is that this is actually a group of heart cells that have been plated out on a dish. So it's just heart cells on a dish. And we can see what's going to happen to them. Now you should notice they're contracting, but there's something unique going on. Okay? They're contracting, but they're contracting towards a center place. Okay? So they're starting out on the sides here, here, and here, and they're contracting towards the center. Together. They're working together to give you a two-dimensional direction of the contraction. That didn't happen with just a cell alone. Okay. Now, if you take a whole bunch of heart muscle tissue, you organize it in three-dimensional space, you put some rigid structures in there, so you end up with a top couple of chambers and a bottom couple of chambers of the heart. Okay. Then you end up with an organ. Okay, so an organ is going to be that next level. Tissues was before it. You combine tissues to get organs. Okay, and this here is going to be showing us a heart organ here, and I want you to see how this is beating. Okay, and let me turn the sound down, and let's get to the part that I really want you to look at here. Okay, so let's go back. Now you may be able to see, this is not showing it very fast, but you may be able to see that you've got a top part pumping first and a bottom part pumping second. And that allows blood to come in here, go down to the bottom, and be pumped out. So you combine tissues together and you get not just something that can contract, but something that can act as a pump because it's hollow on the inside and fluid would be coming in and then being pumped out. Okay, so we went up to a new level and all of a sudden we had a new function. Okay, now if we take organs, so let's stick with the heart. So we've got the heart, and let's say we add in a whole bunch of tubing of blood vessels. Well, now all of a sudden we've got an organ system. So it's not just an organ, it's a combination of organs. And it gives us a system. And so now if we have the heart and the blood vessels, then we have a new function. We can pump blood to specific locations in the body. Okay? And the heart alone couldn't do that. You can just pump blood, let blood come in and pump it out. But the blood vessels, you add those in, and now the blood's going to specific places in the body. Now, I'm going to have another video that'll talk more about the organ systems, but there are a number of them. Okay? And if you combine all of those together, you get an organism. Okay? And this is showing a race, all of these human organisms here. And as you're watching this race, just think about how these organ systems are working together. Atoms, molecules, cells, tissues, organs, organ systems working together to allow this wonderful organism, this guy right here, to win and allows him to then be doing his happy dance. Okay? All right. So again, to recap, to go back here to our PowerPoint slide, we've got atoms, small and large molecules, cells, combine those to get tissues, combine those to get organs, combine those to get organ systems, and combine those to get organisms. Okay. If you go back here to your notes packet, you should be able to fill out all of these levels, define them in your own words. I would suggest adding in examples like we did at the beginning. And let's go here to this second theme. Okay, so this second theme that we've hit on as we've talked about all these levels is that new functions emerge. You get new functions at each organizational level. It means cells can't do what a tissue can do. A tissue can't do what an organ or an organ system can do. But, and this is important, higher levels depend on the lower levels. So what that means is that if you've got a cell messed up, you can mess up the tissue, you can mess up the organ system, and the organism. And that's why people are coming into your office often, is because something on the lower level is messed up. And it's affecting them all the way through up to the organism level. Okay, so I've given you the example of a heart cell all the way up through an organism being able to run a race. And I want you to think about your own examples. So give your own example of this theme. I have a lot of students that think about how the bones and the muscles work together and different things like that. And so go through that, think about that, and practice making up your own example.